Welcome to Lesson 17, which is literal equations. Now, literal equations are equations without numbers. Now, you're probably asking me, like, but Mr., we always deal with numbers. This is math. Well, not necessarily, right? There are equations out there that have a ton of variables, and that's all that they have. And we generally use these as like templates to help us solve for a specific uh, you know, solve for an item within a specific situation, like, you know, y equals mx plus b, like where m is our slope and b is our y-intercept. Like we can solve for these things. Now I want to build you off of the idea that you can do this. You're going to do the same operations, or inverse operations, as you normally would with solving for a number. Okay, there is going to be no difference, and I'm going to kind of show that to you here. Now, if you see, for the first one, it says g equals 6 times x, solve for x. Okay, now solving for x is just like what we normally do. Now, I want to get the x, and I'm going to highlight this. That x needs to get by itself, all right? We need to separate 6 and x. Now, in order to separate them, we have to do the opposite. So I'm going to put this up here again. If we are doing, I'll do these in different colors. If we are doing plus, the opposite is minus. If we are doing times, the opposite is division, right? And vice versa, okay? So that's what I mean by inverse operations. Okay. Now 6 times x. 6 times x, I'm going to go here. It says that we need to, divide. So I'm going to divide each side of the equal sign by 6. Now, 6 divided by 6 is just 1. So now, I don't know what g is, so I just bring it down. Okay, so what this is saying is, if I wanted to solve for x in this situation, right, and I just needed x and I already had g, I could plug in for g here. But since I don't know what g is, I'm not going to plug anything in. I'm not going to substitute, and I'm not going to try to solve this any further. It's just setting up the equation in a different format. Now let's try it again for this one on the right here, where it says z equals m minus x, solve for x. Okay, that means I need to get, again, this by itself. Now just keep in mind that minus sign that's in front of it. I'm gonna talk about that in just a moment. But the first thing that we're going to need to do is move this m. Now this m is, anyone want to give a guess? This is positive, right? Because if we look to the left, there's nothing there in between the equal and the m, which means that it's a positive m. Okay, so the opposite of positive, which we say is plus, is minus. Okay, so I'm going to subtract m. I'm going to subtract m over here. Now, we don't know what z is, okay? So that's going to be z minus m equals, so m minus m equals 0 or nothing. But if you notice, this negative is now attached to the x. It's negative x. It said to solve for x or negative x. Well, it said to solve for x. So that x now needs to be positive. Now, the best way to do that is to divide, okay? Divide by -1. Divide by -1. And what that's going to do is it's going to get rid of the negative symbol on the negative x. And so now we have a positive x, and z becomes negative z, okay? Negative m becomes plus m. So it just makes it the reverse. So you have negative z plus m equals x. And I don't need to solve any further from there. Now, if we move on to something like, that was an extra step, and then generally you're not going to run into that very often, but if you do run into that and it gives you a negative exponent where it asked for a positive one, make sure you divide by -1 on both sides. Okay, that's just a little rule. Now, this one right here at the bottom that says a equals p plus p times r times t, and you notice I read it out loud to myself. And the reason why I do that, not just because I'm a teacher and I'm making this video, is because if I say it out loud, I recognize in my brain which operation is happening and where. That way I know what to undo later, okay? Now it says I have to solve for r. Now r is going to be all by its little lonely self, okay? And so we're going to have to get rid of that initial value like we normally do, which is this p right here. Okay, we get rid of that initial value when we solve for x or solve for a specific number. We're going to do the same thing here. Now, if you notice, this is a positive p, okay? And I'm going to rewrite it over here. So a equals p plus p times r times t, okay? And I'm going to minus the p and then minus p here. So p minus p gives me a 0. Now keep this in order, okay? Don't put negative p plus a. It becomes a minus p equals p times r times t. Now, you can do this in two different ways. All right, I'm going to show you an easier way because they're the same inverse operation. It's p times r times t. They're both multiplication, which means I'm going to divide to get r by itself. Okay, I don't want to move the r, I just want to move the p and the t. And the best way to do that is to actually divide by both letters, pt. Okay? Really, Ms. Harrison, that's way too much. Well, I mean, if you think about it, I'm just kind of skipping a step to do it right now because it's the same operation. If these were two different operations, I would have to do them as two different steps, right? But if you look at it on the right, t divided by t goes away. That's 0, or 1, excuse me. And then p divided by p is, again, that's 1. That's going to give me r by itself right where I want it, which is r. And then we have a minus p divided by p times t. And all you're doing is rearranging this. Don't think about it like, oh, well, what does this mean? What does that mean? At this point of the game, you are just showing that you can rearrange equations to use them in different contexts rather than just taking the same equations that, school has always given you and regurgitating them, and it's the same use over and over and over again. With mathematics, you have to be able to apply what you already know, which is inverse operations, using variables, solving for a specific variable, and being able to do that to fit the situation that you need, right? Because sometimes some of these equations, you'll have all the other variables, but like for instance, with this last one here, you may not have known what r was. And you rearrange the equation so that you can find r quickly rather than having to do the inverse and doing all that stuff with all the numbers and just causing yourself a headache. This is a lot faster to rearrange this equation to fit your needs and to solve for a specific variable rather than having to redo and go through it all mathematically after plugging all the numbers in. Watch this as many times as you need. Remember, you're going through the lesson, you're going through 1 through 10. And these things are meant to get harder as you go along. So rewatch the video as needed, okay? And ask any questions in class if you need. And don't feel free to email me or message me. All right, until next time, I'll see you in the next video.